Hi, I'm Effie. This is What Effie Reads, and this video is going to be a bit of a vlog where I go back and read the whole of John Mars's back catalogue. Prior to starting this video, I'd only read The Passengers and What Lies Between Us, so it was very interesting to read the other 8 books that John Mars has published. So settle in, grab yourself a drink, a snack, and let's experience John Mars's work together. So I've just been diving into The Good Samaritan. I'm almost halfway through and it's heavy going. Like, there's a lot of discussion of suicide in quite a lot of detail. I guess kind of to be expected, but maybe not so much. Essentially the story follows this woman who is working at I guess like suicide prevention helpline, but not really. Like, they don't prevent, they're just there to listen. Except this woman has somewhat ulterior motives and actually like encourages people, and she seems to be getting a thrill out of it. And I won't go any further into the plot, but it's been taking some turns that I didn't realise. I've got some theories. I think they're a bit out there and I don't think my theories are going to be correct. But I'm also wondering, halfway through the book, what's going to happen for the other half of the book, because it feels like we're getting pretty close to kind of things resolving. But I don't know, maybe there's going to be more twists and turns, more complications, I don't know. But overall, I am enjoying it. Excuse the makeup, I've just been filming for another video, but I just wanted to update a little more on how I'm getting on with The Good Samaritan. I'm really enjoying it. I'm finding that I have no idea what's going to happen in the best kind of way. Like, I find that thrillers can often be quite formulaic, which, don't get me wrong, I like. But the fact that this one is just so full of twists and turns, so I don't know what's going to happen at all. Like, I have no idea. I'm so close to the end now. I'm about 20% away from the end. And I couldn't even begin to guess what's going to happen in that final 20%. And I love that about it. I will say, again, it's very heavy in its discussion of suicide, depression, and all kinds of things, but it's really gripping me. It's taking longer to get through than I would expect for a book of its size, but I'm just really enjoying the journey. And I think this was a great John Mars to start this video with. So I finished The Good Samaritan and overall I really enjoyed it. I felt like it had a good amount of twists and turns and it kept me guessing in the best way right up until the final page. This was my 3rd John Mars that I'd read, and I would say that it's probably my 2nd favourite. My favourite so far being The Passengers, because I just really enjoyed what it did. But I've yet to be disappointed by a John Mars thriller. And I've now moved on to Her Last Move. I'm not vibing as much with this one as some of the main characters that you're following are police officers, and that's just a big note for me. Annoyingly, the killer is very compelling. Like, it seems like what he's doing out of some kind of vengeance, but possibly a twisted sense of vengeance. I don't know. So, like, that's making me interested. But the fact that, like, it's kind of like a police procedural crime story is not doing it for me, which is a bit annoying. It does seem to have fairly good representation, as we've got like one prominent gay character, and there was an introduction, like very brief. I don't think the character's going to come up again, but there was a trans character. They were introduced in a strange way, but I'm not sure how else you could have worded it effectively to get across the point. Like, I'm sure there are ways of wording it better, but they were described as like, so they opened the door and these two characters saw this trans woman and they said that they could see that she wasn't genetically female, which feels like really clumsy language. I mean, maybe there's a different way of wording it, I'm not sure. But then the interaction with this well, I say I'm not sure, like, I'm sure there is a better way. I don't know how I would word it to convey the same thing. Although I think I would probably come on the side of I wouldn't even try and convey that. But the rest of the interaction with this character was done very respectfully in the way that you would sorry, my arm's getting sore. In a way that you would hope a trans woman would be treated. There's also discussion of sex work in the book, which is something that I feel like you don't get very much. So overall, it's got its pluses and it's got its minuses. Like I say, the killer is very interesting to me. But I don't like that we're following the police and their investigation. This may end up being my least favourite John Marrs book just for those reasons. But I've still got a fair chunk of the book to read. And I will say it is making me want to pick it up, even if, as I say, I'm not interested in reading about the police and their investigation. So it's been a good couple of days, maybe over a week, since I last filmed an update. And that's because I had some kind of infection or something, and like half my face swelled up. It wasn't great, but basically I just wasn't in a place where I could film. So since I last updated, I've finished gosh, I can't remember the name of the book now. Her Last Move. And I don't know, like, I found it compelling, but at the same time, like, I wasn't enjoying following police officers and it being kind of police procedural. But also at the same time, it didn't pull punches. It was intriguing. I was interested by finding out the killer's motivations and all that kind of thing. But before I move on to talking about the other book or books that I've read since then, I do need to have a little spoilery section. So spoilers ahead until the warning is no longer on screen. So I had a really big issue with Her Last Move, and despite otherwise enjoying it, I couldn't in good faith recommend it, and I think its overall rating was maybe a 2 or 2.25 because I had such big issues with it. So I spoke earlier in the video about how I thought the trans rap was really well executed, like some clunky words, but overall I liked it. Unfortunately, it turned out that it had a very J.K. Rowling-esque sort of twist to it, in that the person that seemed to be a trans woman was actually, and this is what I hated because it's basically spreading harmful narratives and inaccuracies. So the person that had been presented as a trans woman was in fact the killer, pretending to be a trans woman to disguise himself. To a certain extent, it almost made sense, but not really. Like, there are ways you can disguise yourself without spreading harmful narratives. And I honestly think that the story could have worked with the killer actually being a trans woman. Like, a lot of the things that this like twist was trying to do could have worked equally as well if the killer had in fact been a trans woman. I don't know. It just sat really uncomfortably with me. And then I read, because it's been about a week or so, I've read When You Disappeared, which is a re-edited republication of When You Disappeared, one of Mars's earlier books, and I felt like it had a very different flavour to his other thriller type books that I'd read so far, in that it was a lot slower, a lot more domestic. It didn't feel as like murdery. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm pretty sure there were murders to it, but I just struggled to have it hold my attention. It did have some interesting twists and turns, but if we take away the issue that I had with her last move, When You Disappeared is probably my least enjoyed John Marrs book to date. And at the moment, I am about 75% of the way through The Vacation. And it is a re-release of another one of Mars's earlier books. I can't remember what the title is. Oh, Welcome to Wherever You Are, I think, was the original title, but it was re-released under the new title of The Vacation. It has a lot of different characters who all have secrets and backstories, and I think despite that, it's really well structured. So the chapters are relatively short, and most of the chapters are split between present day, and then you get flashback to like earlier in the characters' lives, and you see some of the things that they're done, and it's built up really well. And also, despite that fact it having a lot of characters, like, let's see if I can remember. So we've got Savannah, Tommy, Nicole and Eric, Jake and Ruth. So you've got like, and that's if I'm remembering rightly. I think there might be other ones as well, but they're like the major ones. So that's like 5 different strands, but their stories interweave a lot, and the writing is done so well that it's really easy, or at least I'm finding it really easy, to keep track of the different strands. I am interested to see where it goes in the last 25 or so percent. And yeah, I'm really quite enjoying it, despite it again feeling different from other kind of thrillers. It has almost a suspenseness to it, but again, it's not like you're kind of expecting some specific murder. Like, the genre that it is, you expect murder to happen, but it's not following the story structure of a thriller as I would immediately recognize as a thriller. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's pretty exciting because after I finish The Vacation, I only have one more thriller to read, and then I've got like 3 speculative fiction, but I'm getting there and I'm so excited. I'm really enjoying this journey. I thought that at this point I would be a little bit sick of reading thrillers and from the same author, but I'm actually having a really good time. And I'm very happy as well because the last time I did this kind of trying to read an author's back catalogue, I didn't successfully read a whole back catalogue last time. But the last time I did it was Lucy Foley, and it wasn't quite as successful. So I'm really happy that this is going really well. And honestly, I fully expect that the 4 books that I still need to read, I'm actually going to really enjoy. And I don't think it's too much to say that I think John Mars might be an auto-buy and my favourite thriller author. But I guess we'll see, because I've still got quite a bit to read of his back catalogue. Hi, editing me just popping in. As you'll see in the next clip, I got sick right around the time that I finished reading The Vacation, so I didn't actually give final thoughts, and unfortunately it's been about 6 months since I read it. No, longer than that, about 8 months, which tells you how long this video has been in the works. But overall, really enjoyed it. I think it had a really satisfying ending and was just the level of dark that I've come to expect from John Mars. And yeah, it was a good time. Thoroughly recommend. So it's been a minute since I checked in, and the reason for that, and this will tell you how long this video has taken for me to do, because if you watch my videos in December, you will know that it was end of November, start of December that this happened. But I had COVID, and because of that, I wasn't feeling up for filming. But I can report that I have finished Keep It in the Family, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well executed. I really enjoyed the way that you were slowly given snippets of information. I also enjoyed the kind of mixed media segments where you got a little bit of a taste of what was to come, but the dots didn't quite join together until the storyline was fully revealed. I also really liked the way that it had different POVs, so that it was very slow in telling you what was going on, and it also meant that you didn't truly know who was involved. Like you started to think you knew what was going on, and then something else was revealed. And I thought it did a really good job of giving lots of twists right up until the end without it feeling gimmicky at all. And the next John Mars that I'm going to read is The One. However, I'm putting this video just ever so slightly on pause, as it's the Christmas period and I'm looking at my end of year videos as well. So I don't want to be like reading new books before the new year, but I will be jumping back in with both feet in the new year and hopefully get the last 3 read, which are The One, The Minders and The Marriage Act, which are the 3 speculative, because I've now read all of John Mars's thrillers and I'm just on to the speculative ones. I have technically read the speculative ones in the wrong order, because you're meant to read The One first and then The Passengers, or Passengers rather, and then The Minders, then The Marriage Act. But it'll be interesting to see if I notice anything or pick up anything, because I've already read Passengers. I don't think so, because whilst Passengers is speculative, it didn't seem to have any of the tech that, from what little I know about The One, there is in that book, if that makes any sense at all. But for now, see you in the new year. After taking a little break from reading John Mars over Christmas and New Year, I'm now back at it. I am currently reading The One, which was John Mars's first speculative, I think. It's definitely the first speculative that you're meant to read. So I'm enjoying The One at the moment. It's very interesting seeing the way that this like match your DNA has affected different people's lives and like how they handle that. I did think initially it was a little difficult to get into because there's like, I don't even know how many point of views, but there's more point of views than I probably would like, and each point of view is its own thing. I don't know if they're going to cross over at all in the story. They certainly haven't yet, but it was very difficult to figure out which point of view was which kind of storyline. But now I'm there. Like, I can tell you that, like, Christopher's this one, Mandy's this one, Ellie's this one. Like, I feel like I know who the point of views are now. And as soon as I read the name at the start of the chapter telling me whose point of view is, I'm like, oh, okay, it's this one. But it did take me a little bit longer than I would have liked to get into it. There's lots of very interesting things going on that I'm not sure how they're going to be resolved. But also, if reading John Mars's backlist has told me anything, it's that there's likely to be some teeth to the story and things aren't necessarily gonna be wrapped up in a pretty bow, and I like that. So I'm just gonna crack on and see how much progress I can make. I'm about the halfway mark now, a little before the halfway mark. So I guess I'll check back in later when I've got some more thoughts. So I finished the one in the early hours of this morning and I really enjoyed it. I was kept guessing right up until the end, which isn't a surprise because, as I've come to discover, that's kind of a thing John Mars does really well. Also, there were lots of twists and turns that I didn't expect, and John Mars does a really good job of not pulling any punches, I suppose. So really, really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to now see if I can find the TV show on Netflix and just like watch the first episode maybe. I won't put any clips in this video, but I'll probably come back and give my thoughts. Unfortunately, I don't think I've got time to watch the full show now, but I think if I watch the first episode, especially because I'm fresh off finishing the one, I think it'll be really interesting. I have also started The Minders. I'm not very far into it, but my initial thoughts are I can see kind of callbacks to earlier books, and I can see why the speculative novels you're meant to read in a certain order, because there's already been discussion of things that happened in The Passengers, but it was such a number of years ago that I don't remember very much about The Passengers. So I feel like I'm possibly missing something, but also I do know these are standalones. They're just set in a shared universe. So I'm going to try and just enjoy it and not worry too much about the fact that I don't remember exactly who these characters are beyond them being characters in The Passengers. And I did notice that there was a mention of matches with a capital M. So I think there's going to be references to things that happened in the one as well. But so far, I'm enjoying it. It's a very interesting concept. And we'll see how I get on. Having watched the first episode of The One, I definitely think it's a lot more of an inspired by than actually an adaptation, which is fine, but at the same time, I really enjoyed the book and kind of would have liked to have seen like a faithful adaptation. I think it's good in some ways because it's keeping the mystery alive for people that have read the book, but also just makes me sad. And it also, because the book's so fresh in my head, how many times have I said also? Anyway, because the book's so fresh in my head, I'm kind of like trying to square up the storylines of the TV show with the ones I know from the book. So probably a good thing that I don't have time to continue the series just now, but I definitely will be because I enjoyed what I watched. And I've also read a bit more of The Minders, and whilst I am enjoying it, I'm a little mad that it feels like it's kind of backtracked at least one thing from the one, and it's kind of given an answer to one of the questions that the reader was left with at the end of the one, but it was a question that I kind of didn't want an answer for. But like, that's the only negatives I'm seeing of it so far. Otherwise, I am enjoying it. So I don't think I've said what any of these books are about, and like, I guess at this point, if you've made it to this point in the video, you know that already. But essentially, in the Minders, like 5 people, or at least I think it's 5 people, that's what the cover leads you to believe. 5 people are entrusted with all of the state secrets of the UK. It's kind of a sci-fi thing, but basically these 5 people all have the UK state secrets like stored inside of them. And I just had to pause because one of them is participating in a pub quiz and they're asking like, where was Diana buried, or entombed rather. Sorry, I'm like looking down at my Kindle to see the line. And then it goes, that was information that others weren't supposed to know. It was one of the many secrets she was keeping about the royal family, along with the much more explosive truth behind the night of Diana's death. I mean, I love so much what this is hinting at. Whether we get more from that or whether it's just like a subtle dig, I just think that's absolutely brilliant and quite funny, to be honest. I've just finished The Minders, which means I have one more book to go, and then I will have read everything that John Marrs has published to date, although technically the one that's to go isn't out yet. I don't know if it'll be out by the time this video's up. So for time reasons, I listened to the audiobook of this one, and the only other book that I'd done that for was When You Disappeared. So I don't know if I enjoyed it less because I listened to the audiobook version, but it didn't wow me as much as other John Marrs that I've read. Like, it's not a bad book. I think ultimately it's about a 3.75. But I think it was very difficult to get on board with because a lot of the characters weren't characters I could connect with. I don't really know how to sort of phrase it. I did enjoy the ending. The ending was really good. The twist, surprisingly, I saw coming. I think possibly that's the first time I've seen a twist coming in a John Marrs, which is pretty decent considering I've gotten to this point and it's the first time I was like, well, duh, with the twist, but also it was very clearly broadcast. And like I said earlier, I'm a bit disappointed that it sort of tied some stuff up from the one and also kind of backtracked. Without spoiling either book, basically something happens on the last page of the one that, without any kind of explanation, and to be fair, all I would have wanted was like one sentence that was a throwaway to explain, but it's kind of like backtracked. I was going to say the book could have happened earlier, but there's other things that mean it couldn't have happened earlier. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but basically I didn't like that, and I didn't like that one of the unanswered questions from the one was answered in this book. But as I said, didn't dislike it, just didn't love it as much as the others. And the final book I've got to read is The Marriage Act. And I'm really excited for that. And I think there's a high chance of me enjoying it because I feel like it's going to be the most similar to the one out of John Mars's speculative fiction. So I'm very excited to get stuck into that one. So I've finished The Marriage Act. I'm not sure if I even filmed a clip saying I'd started it, but I have read The Marriage Act, and I think, like I've said with a couple of other books that I've read during this video, I struggled with the point of views initially because there were a number of them, and it was a little difficult initially to keep them straight in my head. But once I did, I was obsessed. This was such a good book, and the fact that it went quite dark, you're sort of thinking, oh, it's just going to be like people are encouraged to marry, blah, blah, blah. But the way that it uses smart devices to listen in on the marriages, the way that the characters are very murdery, and the way that the government kind of takes it a step farther and goes, well, we're already doing this to our population. What else can we control? Just so clever, so many twists and turns, and just thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyable. And I definitely didn't guess a lot of the twists. I think one of the biggest twists I should have, because it was so heavily hinted throughout, but I think I just couldn't conceptualize how it got there. But I think it's definitely going to be one of those that on reread I'll really appreciate, because I'll be like, oh, these are all the hints that are being dropped about it. But it was just stunningly well done. And whilst I think all of John Mars's speculative are very kind of Black Mirror-esque, I think this was the most Black Mirror-esque, and I absolutely loved that. I love Black Mirror. Not to sound like a hipster, but I first watched Black Mirror in 2011, and I've just been obsessed ever since then. So these books being so kind of reminiscent of Black Mirror, and especially this one, like I say, I could fully imagine a Black Mirror episode with this concept. So really, really enjoy. So, as I said at the top of this video, I had previously read The Passengers and What Lies Between Us. So, The Passengers is one of Mars's speculative fiction, and the basic concept is that it's the UK in the not too distant future where self-driving cars are the norm, and someone has decided to hijack I believe it's six of the self-driving cars, and it's a race to try and figure out who has done this, why they've done this. And there's also an element of, there's a sort of Inquisition panel whose responsibility is to figure out if the cars or the people in the cars were at fault for accidents that occur with the self-driving cars, and they play a very pivotal part in the story. The fact that it takes place in the not too distant future made it all the more frightening, and I think the way that we're seeing more and more self-driving cars come into being just makes it even more terrifying, I suppose. What I really enjoyed about this book was the fact that it felt like it had been plucked straight out of Charlie Brooker's brain and would sit very well in the Black Mirror universe. I think the Marriage Act just pips it to the post there, because there are elements of the Marriage Act that are even kind of creepier and more Black Mirror-y. But I think The Passengers is very Black Mirror-esque, and when I wrote a review for it after I'd read it originally, I said that it was most similar to Smithereens and Hated in the Nation, and Hated in the Nation's one of my favourite Black Mirror episodes. I found this book to be gripping from start to finish, and even towards the end, when things were starting to be wrapped up in a neat bow, I was still feeling like I had to compulsively read it and find out what had happened, what was going on, and it was very interesting. I did think it possibly wrapped up a little bit too neatly, but it did allude to some less than happy endings, so I would love to know more about that. And to be honest, it's possible that because I read the speculative fiction out of order, there is somewhat of a through line, and I would actually see more of those not so happy endings being revealed in The Minders and The Marriage Act. But it was a couple of years that I read The Passengers, and I think, as I've said earlier in the vlog, I didn't have the knowledge that I would have gotten if I'd read them in order, I guess. The other book that I'd previously read was What Lies Between Us, and it's told through the points of view of Nina and Maggie. I believe they're related. Possibly they live in the same house. I'm not sure. Again, it's been a couple of years since I read it. But once again, I found that Mars had a really good talent for writing a story that was really compulsive and kept you guessing throughout. I did guess some of the secrets quite early on, but there was also some really clever bluffs throughout. I also really, really appreciated the incredibly bittersweet ending. And I believe this book's getting a sequel, which will be really interesting to see. And it'll also be the first true sequel that Mars has written. The speculative books do all take place in a shared universe, and there is an order to read them. So they're kind of sequels of one another, but the thrillers, again, shared universe with Easter eggs, and I really enjoyed picking up on the Easter eggs. But until now, we haven't really had a thriller sequel, and it'll be interesting to see how Mars pulls that off, because thriller sequels can be somewhat challenging. And before we wrap up the video, I thought it would be fun to go through and do a ranking of my thoughts on Mars's 10 books that he's published to date. So, my least favourite book, probably predictable if you've been paying attention, is Her Last Move. And in fact, it's probably the only John Mars that I would not recommend. I think there's some very problematic content in it. And I mean, I think possibly because it is it's not his oldest book, but his older books have been edited and republished. Whereas this one, I think, likely doesn't represent the person that Mars is now. If it weren't for the problematic elements of it, I think it would be a solid story. I'm not a fan of books that follow police officers, but I found it gripping nonetheless. Just, like I say, cannot recommend, like, at all. In ninth place, again, probably not a surprise, because I did say early in the video that if it weren't for the iffy aspects of her last move, this would be my least favourite, and it is When You Disappeared. And then beyond this, we get into the point where all of John Mars's books beyond this point are really solid, and actually it's kind of splitting hairs. So even though there's still another 8 books, I would say all of these books are ones that I would recommend. And I think the lowest rating I've probably given any of these books beyond this point is like a 3.25, a 3.5. So even though they might be number 8 in the ranking, they're still excellent books and I would recommend. So in 8th place, we have The Minders. I think my issue with this one was that there were too many POV and I didn't really connect with any of them. Also, and this is very much a me issue, I think I would have benefited from having read The Passengers straight before reading this, or at least having The Passengers clearer in my mind before picking this up. In 7th place is The Passengers. Very, very solid book. I think the fact that the ending felt a little bit rushed puts it lower down, but still incredibly solid and recommend. And I think just basically, if you're going to pick up Mars's speculative work, read them in order. There is a graphic on John Mars's Instagram and probably other social and websites, and it basically shows the reading order. And yeah, read them in order basically. But they do stand alone. They just are a bit better if you read them in order. In 6th place, we've got What Lies Between Us. I really enjoy the way that Mars writes thrillers. I like the way that he doesn't pull punches and they're just perfectly dark. In 5th place was The Good Samaritan. This one kept me guessing so much. Like, I had no idea where the story would go, and the way that it seemed to be preparing to wrap up at the midpoint so that you had a whole heap of shocking stuff to come in the second half that you never in a million years could have predicted, I thought was really excellently done. And again, nice and dark. In 4th place, we've got The Marriage Act. As I said before, this one probably is most similar to an episode of Black Mirror, and I love Black Mirror so much. It is a speculative one. The way that the smart devices was used was very creepy and believable. And there were some things that I think I will pick up on the clues and hints more on reread, but I never saw them coming when I was initially reading it. In 3rd place is The Wad. This was Mars's first speculative novel, and I went in not really knowing if I was going to enjoy it or not, because it seemed a bit, I guess, cheesy, but it was so well executed. Again, there was a really interesting, almost thrillery aspect to it. It got dark in places. There was one bit that took me by surprise, and whilst I feel like I'm aware of what my triggers are in books, there was something that happened that made me go, okay, that's something I never expected would trigger me, but that's different. And the way they ended was so well done, I guess. In 2nd place, we have The Vacation. I really enjoyed this one. I thought the way that it was crafted so that you slowly got the backstory as you were also seeing the characters in the present. I thought there was a lot of darkness in the characters. some very satisfying moments, and overall fantastic. And my favourite one, which by process of deduction you'll be able to figure out, but the number one spot is Keep It in the Family. This is one of Mars's thrillers. It was incredibly well crafted, with lots of shocking moments, lots of cleverly placed red herrings, and also the way that mixed media was used throughout the book, and the fact that the information was presented out of order. So on a reread, you'd be absolutely astounded at the way that the clues were carefully presented. But the first time you read it, it goes right over your head. And I really appreciate that. So as I say, numbers 8 to 1, all highly recommend. Number 9 just wasn't my cup of tea, but it was still very much a John Mars thriller, just not my cup of tea. And number 10, as I say, just cannot recommend in good conscience. So that's it. I am now 100% up to date on John Mars's back catalogue, and I can quite confidently say that John Mars is probably my favourite thriller author, and I look forward to when his next book comes out, which I believe is the start of 2024. Let me know down in the comments if you have read any of Mars's books, what you think about his work, what your favourite John Mars is, and if you haven't read John Mars before, do any of these books sound like something that would appeal to you? But until next time, love you! Bye!